follows a longer term strategy, but also the here and now issues that have arisen because of the COVID pandemic, and more importantly, because of the economic recovery packages that have been announced. We looked at the economic recovery packages and saw that there was room, particularly to promote renewable energy in rural areas and in MSMEs. And it is a great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Mr. Ajay Shankar, who put together a piece on what are the kinds of opportunities that could arise as we use the economic recovery package to do the long-term issue of promoting, number one, economic growth, number two, jobs, number three, a cleaner environment. As we do all of this, we obviously have a number of challenges. And as we look at those challenges, it becomes important for us to see what are our options, what are the kinds of things that we do, and I would suggest also what are the kinds of bottlenecks that we face. So this afternoon, we will request Mr. Ajay Shankar to talk about the report. And then I will request the Secretary MNRE, Mr. Chaturvedi, to release the report and deliver the report. Following that, I will hand it over to Mr. Govindraj Ethiraj, who I will request to moderate a discussion between Dr. Rajat Kathuria and Mr. Simon Stolp. And we will end this with my colleague, Dr. Shilpi Kapoor, delivering the vote of thanks. So let me welcome Mr. Chaturvedi, Mr. Ethiraj, Dr. Rajat Kathuria, as well as Mr. Ajay Shankar and Dr. Shilpi Kapoor, and everybody else who is connected, and hand it over to Mr. Ajay Shankar for an introduction to the report that he has prepared on a fiscally responsible green stimulus. Mr. Ajay Shankar, all yours.
Thank you for this opportunity. There has been a considerable amount of discussion in recent weeks and months about the ways in which to try and cope with the severe economic downturn, not only in India but across the world, which COVID-19 pandemic has caused. There's been discussion on kinds of stimulus that people provided, also discussion on fiscal constraints and how to design a stimulus for the current situation in India, where we had constraints on the fiscal side, which have been far larger than the constraints in Europe and the US. Europe and the US have had fairly large relief packages or stimulus packages in place since the lockdown. In spite of that, the human distress has been mitigated. The economies are in severe difficulty. Everybody says it's the worst the Great Depression. Now, the Europeans have also put in place a fairly strong green stimulus. The Germans began with it, but now the whole of Europe has it. US, of course, does not believe at the moment that climate change is changing and that they need towards green. But the people who control the Congress New Deal.
एक बार क्लिक करेंगे तो ब्राउज़र ओपन होगा
Mr. Biden said that of the 4 challenges that he would, or America confronts, climate change is one of them. And he also spoke about having fossil fuel electricity in 15 years. The Europeans have been looking at a consensus on having a net carbon neutral economy by 2050. Now, if we look at India, the last few years, starting with the National Solar Mission, have been an extraordinary success story in the deployment of renewable energy, especially solar energy. I had the privilege and good fortune of being associated with the design of the mission, which was launched in 2010. And the feature of our success, which also needs to be appreciated, is that almost all the investment in solar energy has been done by the private sector, and it's a private sector driven competitive industry structure that has brought us so far. Now, as a country, we have raised our ambition levels. Figure of 450,000 megawatts of renewable energy capacity is being enunciated. So, when we began the exercise, we began looking at the issue of the need for a stimulus. We took note of the enormous liquidity which the government stimulus packages have injected into the financial system. And we started seeing where we could give renewable energy additional momentum without asking for budgetary resources. Now, in the last few years, air pollution has become a very critical national health issue. And so we also started seeing where we could suggest some measures to mitigate air pollution also. So our starting point was, how do we look at something which will work, which doesn't ask for money from the budget? How do we get something which will work, which doesn't hurt the consumer, because and then that's where the direct tax system. So what is feasible? Now, when we began with the exercise, we were quite pleasantly surprised to find that a lot of things could be done and could be done which would result in a win-win situation for everybody. So I will go a little back and forth in terms of the sequence of measures recommended in the report. But one idea which we picked up was that if we can create a price signal in the market and some assurance of demand, and a price signal which makes private investment commercially viable, sustainable, then I think we are through. We look at our own history. The biggest revolution we achieved was the Green Revolution. And what was put in place was the procurement price which was assured for farmers if they produced more wheat. So we also looked at the success of the feed-in tariff in Germany, which made the global breakthrough in solar power possible. So that feed-in tariff was higher than the normal tariff. But it created a globally competitive solar industry and went down the cost curve very dramatically. So what are our recommendations? One takes off from the idea implicit in Kusum and also enunciated in the finance minister's budget, that we put in a route feed-in tariff for solar power generation in villages, so the farmers can earn more money. Now, we have said that we put in a feed-in tariff of 4.5 rupees a unit at the village level, below 1 megawatt, first come, first supply at designated points in the grid, either at the substation or the transformer. Then at 4.5 rupees a unit, it's very attractive for the private sector and the market forces to invest, because the discovered price for solar power in the solar parks in the bids has been well below 3 rupees. And typically a DISCOM incurs between 7 and 8.5 or even 9 rupees in terms of actual cost of delivering to villages in rural areas. So they save well over 3 rupees a unit. It's a win-win for everyone. And it's below 1 megawatt level. So if you put this in place, the feed-in tariff approved by the Regulatory Commission in the state, we have 6 lakh villages, so you could look at 6 lakh megawatts over the next 7, 8, 10 years. It's a huge breakthrough. This takes us beyond the 450,000 megawatts we've announced. I will extend the same concept another stage further and look at the problem of the bio-waste that is now available because of the success of Ujjwala. and the provision of the LPG chulha or the cooking gas cylinder and the stove, then this biomass is available. Now, one technology which has been fashionable is biogas, but there are issues there in how to get a business model and how to get marketing. So what we have suggested is that till that succeeds, we use the gas to generate electricity and again have a feed-in tariff. And the target should be to absorb all the cow dung and other, animal waste that is being generated in the country over a period of next 5-10 years. And a feed-in tariff here also would not involve any subsidy, because our view is that it will probably be approximately what the actual cost for a discount. Then we have moved on to the challenge of air pollution caused by the burning of crop waste, especially in North India. Now, NTPC has had a very successful pilot project where they've converted this crop waste into briquettes and used this to substitute for coal in their coal power station. And they find that the cost of using this is comparable to the cost of coal that they're using. So they don't lose money, they don't subsidize the tariffs of the cost of that. So if you had an MSP kind of equivalent for either buying all the briquettes that private enterprises can produce, then you could take care of the crop burning and the crop waste problem, which causes severe air pollution in North India and around the valley. It's a real difficult. Because other things like, happy seeders haven't really worked and will take years to work. And the Supreme Court mandated, towers which will absorb air pollution is, in my humble view, more cosmetic and optical than real in terms of solving the air pollution problem. Now, going further, we looked at the government's approach of providing guarantees for loans taken by SMEs. 3.5 lakh crores is what has been guaranteed by the SMEs. So we said if the MSC investments, either directly or facilitated by SMEs or facilitated by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency or any other ESCO, if energy efficiency investments are covered by the guaranteed loans, then there is a huge potential of energy savings and increasing the competitiveness of MSME, because energy costs are a significant part of production costs. So we look at huge savings there. Then going further, we feel that the auto sector is suffering badly, and the transport and auto sector causes considerable air pollution across the country. We have BS6 now, but BS6 will take 10-15 years to work its way through the system as all the old vehicles go off the road. So what we have proposed is a 50% rebate in GST for old commercial vehicles to begin with, which get handed over for recycling. So recycling facilities are created, each traded in commercial vehicle is tracked, properly recycled, so it's off the road. And a 50% rebate in GST is again win-win for all, because the demand is modest. So with a 50% rebate in GST, the government gets at least 50% revenue. And the air becomes cleaner. And if you do a more thorough cost benefit of air pollution and health costs, then the costs of investment in air pollution mitigation is well worthwhile. In fact, the finance minister has announced in the budget 4,000 crores for it mitigation. So that's one idea. And the final one, of course, is a slightly grander kind of proposal, which is that government sells, or rather takes the EESL bidding process to the next level by saying that we will say, here is a place where you have land for manufacturing, we will provide you electricity, you supply us 1,500 megawatts per year of solar power for 5 years in a row at the market discovered price through a tender. And we repeat what we've done with the super thermal power project bids, where when we said that L1 will get, say, 1.5 GW per year of supply for 5 years, L2, L3, if they match L1, will get 1,000 megawatts of supply for 5 years. 5 years is enough for amortizing the capital costs of investment. And so we will buy, and we'll do these tenders every year the way we did for the solar power procurement in the early days of the solar mission. So all going well, the first supplies with 100% value addition or 90-95% value addition. What is technically feasible could well begin in 23-24. It goes on for 5 years. If we do it 3-4 years in a row, we will have a competitive domestic manufacturing industry with 100% value. Yeah. Achievement of the vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat. And if the tenders are competitive and duty-free import of equipment, etc., is applied, then there is no reason why the cost of production and manufacturing in India should be higher than even in China if we exclude subsidy. So we should then have, in 5-7 years, a truly globally competitive manufacturing industry with more or less 100% value in India. This is huge private investment which should come because risk mitigation is fully taken care of because the government will buy 5 years of full production. So we are through. So that is, in a nutshell, the set of our specific recommendations. We were pleasantly surprised when we did the numbers and the arithmetic. The investment potential over the coming decade is really huge. We believe it is realistic and achievable, and it's a discussion paper, so hopefully it will undergo critical scrutiny and stakeholder consultation and dialogue. And we think it would work well in the short run when there are limitations because of COVID issues, because of other investment is in rural areas. And as we go along, it will acquire greater momentum and greater value, and India will well be on its way of maybe seriously considering and discussing how we could match the advanced countries in having fossil fuel electricity and net carbon neutral.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Can I now request Mr. Indu Shekhar Chaturvedi, Secretary to the Government of India, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, to release the report and then to deliver the keynote address. Mr. Chaturvedi. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Sir, can I now request you to share your thoughts with us?
Thank you. Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General, TERI, Shri Ajay Shankar, Govindraj Ethiraj, Mr. Simon J. Stolp, Dr. Rajat Kathuria, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be with you today, and I'm sure the document being launched will turn out to be a very useful contribution to the ongoing debate on green economy, and it will be of interest not only to those who think and worry about clean energy, environmental pollution and climate change, but also about the economy in general. I think one of the strengths of the paper is that it takes a holistic approach. It adopts an approach which is at least more holistic than is usually done in thinking about the issues relating to the economy and the environment and clean energy. And it covers intervention in 6 areas. Now, another thing which is immediately clear is that some of these areas are areas which have been rather neglected, in the sense that areas like waste to energy and agricultural waste to energy and animal waste to energy, I don't think we have done as much as we should have done. And these are particularly important, as Shri Ajay Shankar said, these are particularly important if one considers the fact that they would contribute very substantially toward curbing environmental pollution. The practical usefulness of the paper lies in its policy recommendations. One might agree or disagree with the recommendations, but at the minimum, I think the paper would persuade all stakeholders to think deeply about these issues and arrive at their own conclusions. Now, as far as the government is concerned, some of the recommendations are being already broadly acted upon. For example, PM Kusum is one of our flagship schemes, and it aims at using solar energy for de-dieselization of the farm sector and increasing farmers' income. We have ambitious plan for the scheme in the coming years, and we are also thinking of revising the guidelines so that instead of solarizing grid-connected individual pumps in component C, we solarize entire feeders, and this would bring in economies of scale, would benefit the farmer as well as the DISCOM. And I think the most striking feature of the arrangement would be that there would be no upfront capital investment by the DISCOM or anyone. These would be implemented in the RESCO model. We are also working toward interventions to encourage domestic manufacturing. We have a proposal for BCT, which is with the Finance Ministry. Our minister has already, I think, mentioned it in various fora. And along with that, we have proposed an interest subvention scheme, which is also under process. So we hope to have a framework where domestic manufacturing, domestic solar manufacturing gets an impetus. We have been working on improving the dispatchability of renewable energy, and we have designed some innovative tenders around the clock power. I mean, these are initial steps, but these indicate the directions we intend to work toward in the coming days and years. We also have plans for surplus for generating energy from surplus biomass, and we are thinking of a scheme to take care of what was said by Shri Ajay Shankar about the waste burning. I mean, these are initial steps, but we hope that they will gather momentum in the coming years. As far as the broad renewable energy performance is concerned, we have done reasonably well in the last few years. Last 6 years, our RE installed capacity has grown about 2.5 times, and the share of installed renewable energy capacity today is about 23% in the total installed capacity. However, we have a long way to go if one considers the ambitious targets we have set for ourselves: 175 gigawatt by 2022 end, and then going on to another 450 gigawatt. And also, if one considers the fact that our share in electricity generation, the share of RE in electricity generation is still only 12%. So it's about only 1/10 of the total electricity generation. So I think that's a more important statistic than the 23% one. The renewable energy landscape is expected to see rapid technological changes in the coming years, and these will drive down costs not only of generating renewable energy, but also the costs that are presently associated with integrating RE into the grid. And in our renewable energy journey, I think these we should keep abreast of these technological changes and take full advantage of them. And especially in the area of storage, the costs are expected to come down rapidly within 2 years, and we should be ready with our models, with our business models and other things to take advantage of this. So let me end with these thoughts. I thank TERI again for inviting me to this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chaturvedi. We are immensely grateful to you for your time and for sharing your thoughts with us. MNRE is clearly a feather in the Indian cap, and I'm sure that we'll go on from one success to another along the lines that you just spoke about. We have two stalwarts of the financial sector, the economic sector, and the energy sector with us. Dr. Rajat Kathuria, who is the director of ICRIER, and Mr. Simon Stolp, who heads the energy and extractives business in the South Asia office of the World Bank. Moderating the discussion is Mr. Govindraj Ethiraj, the founder and CEO of IndiaSpend. So without further ado, Govind, can I hand it over to you and request you to take it further?
Right, Dr. Mathur, thank you very much for inviting me to host this discussion. Quick this thing. So maybe what I could do is request Dr. Kathuria and Simon Stolp to speak for a few minutes on what you or how you look at the whole subject of a fiscally responsible green stimulus and how you think of these 6 key proposals. So let me ask, and maybe about 2 or 3 minutes each, and then we could launch into a discussion. So can I invite Dr. Kathuria to go first?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Ethiraj, and at the outset, thank you, Ajay, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be on this platform, and thank you, Mr. Ajay Shankar, for that, for the release of, for outlining some proposals for a green stimulus, and really impressed by the remarks that Mr. Chaturvedi made. Let me, as you say, at the outset, say a couple of things that I think about the report in general, and then we can get into specifics. If you look at the sort of reform trajectory for India, then one is struck by the fact that, whenever we've introduced reform in India, it's been on the back of a sort of a crisis. And I think we should not waste this opportunity that presents itself in the form of a pandemic, however dark that might sound. But this is an immense opportunity for India to put in place certain reforms in the sort of in the product market, in the capital market, in labor markets, in land markets, whatever. I mean, all the reforms that we've been talking about, this is an opportunity to do that. And I hope we will seize this opportunity to be able to take advantage of this. India faces enormous challenges as an economy. Not the least is, the lower growth rate or the declining growth rate. But I think the other crisis that India faces is one of sort of jobs and productively employing the young population that is going to come into the labor force over the course of the next few years. So all proposals that have been presented here, are good in the sense that they provide a fiscally responsible way to create those jobs. And I think simultaneously what we also need to recognize is that we will not be able to create those jobs immediately. We will need a lot of complementary reform to be done simultaneously, including education and skilling, which will probably be a little more long term. So I think this crisis also points to the fact that given that a number of people who are employed in the informal sector don't have access to any form of medical security or social security, one of the imperatives for the Indian economy really is to, while we try and formalize the jobs and create productive employment opportunities for a large population that is going to come into the labor force, we have to be able to create social security in the informal sector until we are able to create productive jobs. And I think that is absolutely imperative, and we need to do this now. We cannot postpone that. And I think if we are going to do that, we might as well do that in a sort of sustainable and inclusive manner. And that's why I think these proposals are very welcome and they should be discussed more. Let me make a couple of more points before I hand it back to you and getting into more detail, is that I think at the heart of this report is the appeal to sort of use the market mechanism much more. And I think that is something that policymakers will be well advised to follow. And what I mean by using the market mechanism much more, Govind, is the fact that we have to use the price signal much more, because as an incentive to getting the right outcome, I think there is nothing better than a price signal. We've seen in India, when we try and impose quantities, when we use non-price mechanisms to try and get the outcomes that we want, we often end up creating distortions in the market that become entrenched and become very difficult to then unravel. So I think use of the price signal, whether it is through carbon pricing, whether it is through feed-in tariffs, I think that is the right way to go, and that comes out very strongly in the report. We can have other sort of behavioral changes, nudge, we can do nudge sort of on the sidelines, in the sort of periphery, but I think the main sort of approach towards trying to create a responsible stimulus is to use the price signal much more. And related to that, and I think Mr. Ajay Shankar has also mentioned that, related to that is use the private sector much more. Wherever the private sector can come in and wherever the private sector can deliver, I think that is something that India should adopt much more. Of course, there will be market failures, and we can discuss that. And I think there will be lots of market failures. There are some very interesting proposals that I'd be happy to talk about. City transport, the proposal with respect to junkyards, the proposal with respect to the circular economy. I think they deserve a lot more attention. But in my initial remarks, I would say that creating green jobs, very important, using the price signal, very important, and of course getting the private sector involved as much as possible. Given that our high growth rates that we saw in the early part of the century were driven largely by the private sector, I think we should use the private sector much more than we have. So with these sort of initial remarks, let me hand this back to you, Govind.
Thank you. It's over to you, Mr. Stolp.
Thank you, Govind, and thank you, Dr. Mathur and Secretary MNRE for having me here to make a few comments today. Firstly, congratulations on a timely and extremely critical piece of work. From here on, I think I'll echo Dr. Kathuria, who's just spoken. I'm calling in from Singapore, and it reminds me, being in Asia, of the fact that in a number of Asian languages, the same written character is used for both crisis and opportunity. And I think one of the strongest parts of this report is the fact that it seizes on the crisis to drive opportunity. A theme that we've seen through the government of India's response over the last several months, and I commend the report and the government on that attitude and the embodiment of that philosophy. Secondly, I want to go beyond the initiatives that the report talks about and talk a little bit about what I see as one of its most important aspects, and that's the lens through which it has developed these initiatives. Dr. Kathuria touched on many of these points. Firstly, the fact that it's a demand-driven approach. It recognises and is sensitive to the fact that the government is not in a strong fiscal position and has many, many other competing needs for its resources at the moment. It therefore doesn't rely on the government to come up with the initial capital investments to drive these initiatives, and rather looks at actually creating more fiscal space through these initiatives. A very important underlining approach to the way in which I think economic stimulus needs to be structured in India. Secondly, it's entirely pragmatic. Obviously, each of these initiatives has been thought through already. Secretary MNRE touched on this. Many of them are in the process of formulation or delivery at the moment. And this is important when we look at economic stimulus. Projects, particularly infrastructure projects that are used to stimulate economies in a position such as this, need to be shovel ready. They can't have extensive construction lead times if they're to meet some of the short-term purposes of that stimulus. And in each of the instances that the report outlines, I think the government and the sector as a whole are positioned to deliver. Thirdly, these natural paths to leveraging broader capital flows and bringing in the private sector. It's part of this demand-driven response that the report takes. I absolutely agree with the doctor's comments on the need to bring private sector into play here. It further relieves the burden on public resources to create this stimulus. It really does need to be broad-based. And then lastly, the balance of policy objectives. In the immediate onset of the COVID-19 crisis, we saw a number of opportunistic statements arise from governments around the world looking at building back better, at green growth paths out of the current situation. It's a difficult balance to achieve, though, the sometimes competing imperatives of delivering short-term stimulus and growth, short-term jobs growth, balanced with longer-term economic fundamental growth, and the need to deliver on some of the government's policy objectives around climate change and decarbonisation of Indian industry. I think what's most relevant about this report is it strikes that balance. It manages to deliver the potential for short-term jobs growth, short-term economic stimulus, but through a lens that doesn't let go of the decarbonisation policy objective of government. I think we can use this report as a basis for further development. I think there are good examples and good ideas here that can be used to foster others, and that the government should then prioritise amongst those. Speaking specifically to the initiatives, I endorse them all. The bank is already working in some way, shape or form to support the Government of India and MNRE in 5 out of the 6 objectives. We hadn't quite managed to get around to developing briquettes from agricultural waste yet, but maybe we can put that on the agenda as well. Lastly, I think the success of economic stimulus will rest on the governance structures that oversee this. In each of these initiatives, there is an element of both central and state government participation, and it's going to be important through the implementation of these initiatives to balance those interests and ensure that they're harmonised and working together towards mutual benefit. Let me stop there, Govind, and turn back to you. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Let me come back to you, Mr. Kathuria. So you talked about transport and transport solutions. You also said that you wanted to touch upon that a little more. So one of the proposals that sounded very interesting is the one about substituting 500,000 government cars with electric vehicles for inner city use, and that could save about 830 million liters of fuel. So how feasible is that, exciting as it sounds?
So it's very exciting, David. I think that's the way to go, because this transition, I think, will suffer from a lack of scale. You know that, if you study the economics of, let's say, technology traps, or let me give you the example of a computer keyboard. If you look at the keyboard today and you say that it's a QWERTY keyboard. And I don't know how many of you know that the QWERTY keyboard was developed sometime in the mid-1850s, and the layout of the keyboard has remained the same, despite the fact that there is a more advanced keyboard that is out there. But given that the ecosystem around the QWERTY keyboard has developed so much, it becomes very difficult to displace it. And I don't think the market will be able to displace, and it hasn't for 150 years or more, the market hasn't been able to displace an entrenched equilibrium. Now you could say that the new sort of keyboard is not technologically more advanced than QWERTY, and hence QWERTY has stayed. But the point is that the infrastructure around QWERTY became so developed that you got into a situation where it became difficult to get out of it. And if you wanted to get out of it, you would have to have a large sort of demand for a non-QWERTY keyboard. And if you look at that idea, and you sort of apply that idea to what the team, what Mr. Ajay Shankar has been saying, and this is something that we want to do. We want to do because it will reduce emissions, it will be more efficient, but the market by itself will not be able to do it, therefore we need supportive policies to do it. And what is that one big agency that can provide that demand push? It is obviously the government. And therefore, if the government is mandated to buy sort of electric-based cars for inner city transport, it would provide that momentum, it would provide that demand for suppliers then to begin to supply electric cars, and then you could take the benefits of scale, you could have the benefits of scope. But I think there will be market failure in this because of the entrenched economy and the entrenched architecture of the fossil fuel economy. And if you want to break out of it, you need that initial support from the government. And I think this is an idea that is worth pursuing because the benefits are long term. And you sometimes don't look at those benefits. You don't see those benefits in terms of health, in terms of quality of the product, in terms of agriculture. You don't see those immediately. Those will be long term. But if those are factored in, then this idea will make a lot of economic sense. But I think this is something that we should put on the table. Scale is something that is necessary, and I think government can provide that scale. And the other related, if you permit me, the other related sort of idea is what do you do with those cars that are going to be scrapped? And I think that idea of creating those scrap yards that would create employment, right now it happens in the informal setting in India. And you could sort of formalize that so that it becomes mandated by policy and it also begins to provide sort of employment. But we need mandated scrap yards, you provide land for scrapping of old cars, and at the same time provide this great demand push, a huge demand push for the government so that this economy can take off and displace over time the entrenched fossil fuel economy that I don't think is going to be an economy of the future. It's not. So you might as well, begin to take those actions now.
Right. So, we are. This conversation is in the context of COVID and acceleration and the need for acceleration. So, do you think that we are? I mean, whether you look at this proposal or some of the other proposals as well, including, let's say, saying that every village can produce or maybe help to produce 1 megawatt of power into 600,000 villages. So, I mean. So one is the objective, which is good, but the speed of acceleration or the launch velocity for projects like this because of COVID. I mean, are you seeing that difference, or is it still looking like a good idea to be rolled out over time?
So it will always sort of be a good idea, and even if you're in a non-COVID situation, this would appear as a good idea. But I think the challenge for implementation in India case, and the Achilles heel for India in some sense, and Mr. Ajay Shankar knows this better than any of us do, is sort of the political will to do that. And I think the fiscal space can be found, the finance can be found. I think finance chases good projects, and if there are good projects, finance will come in, both from the private sector and, as Simon had hinted, from cross-border financial flows. I think finance will come in. I think it needs political will and it needs good implementation. If we can get the political will, if we can get the implementation, finance will follow. And these are good ideas. It always needs good execution skills, and I think that's been sort of as I said, the Achilles heel for India's economy. And this is an opportunity to set that right, because I think there will also be sort of in terms of the political constituency of the government, the appetite for taking tough decisions should also be there at this point, because we are all sort of trying to come out of this pandemic or the sort of economic crisis this pandemic has witnessed. Right. So we all want to come out of it, and I think there will be appetite to take tough decisions also.
Right. So, Mr. Stolp, I know you've said that you've looked at some of the proposals, and I mean you're essentially in sync with everything. So I don't know if you've specifically worked on or were familiar with the one to do with reduction in energy costs in small and medium enterprises. So again, the figure is very interesting. I think there's a World Bank survey which along with TERI, which said that you could save 10 to 15% in energy costs, and there were 350 small and medium enterprises studied. 67 crore rupees, almost $10 million, could be saved. And if we were to scale that up to 700,000 small enterprises which are there, the savings could be quite staggering. So if you're familiar with this, I mean, can I ask you to maybe talk a little bit about how do you see something like this rolling out, or conversely, how could this be pushed a little harder?
Thanks, Govind. That's an interesting question, and probably one of the areas I'm the least familiar with across the 5 of the 6 that we're currently supporting. But let me try and shape an answer anyway. We've looked at MSMEs through a number of particular, from a number of particular perspectives with respect to economic stimulus. And I think what you're talking about here is on the cost side, reducing the cost of their operations and providing them the fiscal space to expand. We've been looking at other exercises in credit enhancement that would open up debt flows to MSMEs. We've also been looking at ways in which we could credit enhance their access to alternative forms of energy, such as solar rooftops. We've been cognizant for some time that the great raft of Indian MSMEs do not have credit-worthy status and therefore have extremely difficult access to debt. I think in some respects, looking at their energy efficiency also factors into this, much more indirectly than some of the other issues we've been looking at, but certainly it's an opportunity on a number of different levels. Firstly, to reduce the costs of operations for MSMEs and therefore, as I said before, increase their ability to reinvest and grow, to add jobs, to take advantage of other forms of economic stimulus and use this period as an opportunity. But secondly, it also contributes to their overall financial situation and their ability to access the debt that would support their growth. Coming back to energy efficiency, I heard Mr. Shankar talk about ESL and some of the models it has developed to promote energy efficiency, and we're very, very strong supporters of ESL and the efforts that the Bureau of Energy Efficiency have made in India. In fact, we hold those institutions up as standard bearers in many of the discussions we have with international clients. I think ESL has already demonstrated its ability and the ability of the government to fashion implementation methodologies that are fit for purpose in the Indian context. To date, that effort has been around some of the low-hanging fruit, the rollout of municipal street lighting, the rollout of widespread LED lighting in residential applications. But I think this is an opportunity now for institutions such as ESL to look at a specific sector, look at the industrial sectors in particular, and start driving energy efficiency in them. They already have those tools. I think it's just a matter of bringing them together. And I think this is an area that really does deserve some immediate focus.
Right. So what's the area that you're the most passionate about in the context of the outcome that it is likely to achieve, or the better outcome that it's likely to achieve?
Without talking to quantification and the numbers, I think the idea of solarizing agricultural power supply really appeals to me on a number of levels. In fact, we've done some work, some analytical work on this in Rajasthan recently, looking at the government's Kusum scheme and piloting the rollout of that. We've also been working with Dr. Mathur and TERI on alternative forms of providing a subsidy benefit to the agricultural community for power supply. The focus of all of these efforts has been on reducing the cost, reducing the consumption of electricity and water at the agricultural level, and reducing the fiscal burden that places on the state. The fact that you can do all of this, theoretically at least, and in some cases now in practice, as is being shown right now, and also create alternative forms of income for an agricultural community is absolutely fantastic. I mean, given the the level of GDP that is attributable to the agricultural sector in India, and given what you can unlock in terms of potential, if you can enhance the livelihoods of the farming community, I think this particular recommendation is attractive on a number of levels. Again, beyond the quantification of the benefits, because it really speaks to a social element within India's economic structure that I think is extremely important.
Right. Dr. Kathuria, you also talked about jobs, and obviously in the context of significant job loss, though now I think it's clear that it's more salaried jobs that have been lost than informal, which is actually most of it has come back post the particularly the migration crisis. So what's your, when you look ahead, how would you measure the outcomes in the context of decisions taken in the midst of crisis? Since we did say that it's crisis which usually stirs us to great things.
So I think the numbers are back. The unemployment rate is down again in the middle of the crisis, in the middle of the pandemic. The unemployment rate had gone up and it's come down. But I think what the report is discussing and what we're discussing is how can we sustain this? How can we sort of overcome the problems in the labor market that India faces? And let me repeat what I said in the beginning. The problem that India faces in its labor market is the fact that an overwhelming percentage of those jobs are in the informal sector and they are sort of relatively less productive. So we've got to make those jobs more productive, and therefore I think one of the ways to make them more productive is obviously to formalize those jobs. And therefore the government and also the report talks so much about MSMEs, and it is the MSMEs that are going to be the vehicle for productive job creation for a large segment of our population that is going to come into the labor force. And I think there is something, what we've done is like we're dealing with a crisis right now. So therefore, some of those jobs have come back. And they're mostly in the informal sector. But I think we have a larger problem. And that larger problem is how do you sort of formalize these jobs and how do you provide these people with sort of benefits, right, social security, decent jobs. And I think one of the things that the report does talk about, and I'd sort of like Mr. Ajay Shankar to respond if he either now or perhaps later, is that MSMEs are going to be, and we know that they're going to be sort of be the vehicles of job creation. And what happens in most countries, including in China, if we sort of compare ourselves, especially with respect to manufacturing, is that they achieve scale. And India hasn't been able to achieve scale in terms of its MSMEs. They sort of remain small. The firm size dynamics has been such that the firms have been encouraged to remain small, and therefore they haven't created the kind of jobs that China has been able to create in the manufacturing sector. Now the question is, what would it take for these MSMEs to become eventually grow in size? Is import substitution the way to go? I mean, I know the report uses import substitution in a guarded way. It's not sort of at all going to the import substitution that we saw in India in the 70s and 80s. I mean, import substitution means you wish to create those sort of tasks and those jobs within the country. And the question is, what is the best way to incentivize creating those jobs within the country? Is it going to be a sort of a quantitative approach, or is it going to be a price approach? It is going to be sort of a carrot or a stick approach. And I think that's something that we need to debate, because this is a discourse that is happening sort of not only in the context of China, but this is a discourse that is happening in a larger context. We've seen the finance minister announce in so many budgets before this an increase in tariffs on so many products to encourage Make in India, to encourage products to be made in India. So we have to really, discuss this. Is that the right way to go about it? How do you encourage MSMEs to produce more in India? And if you're going to provide a green stimulus, if you're going to encourage energy efficiency, what is it that we need to do for MSMEs? And I think that's a question that we need to address here and now. And not only in the context of China, in a larger context of MSMEs becoming the instruments or vehicles for job creation. And let me just say this, sorry to extend this, India faces a huge sort of social and humanitarian crisis if it's not able to create those productive jobs in the country.
Right. We've almost run out of time, so I'm going to come to Mr. Stolp for the last word. So, when you look, if you were to take a step back, maybe a 30,000 feet step, is this sufficient to create or trigger substantive change? But when I say this, I mean fiscally neutral suggestions, demand-led.
The initiatives that are outlined in this report in and of themselves are not going to transform the Indian economy and provide the stimulus that is absolutely necessary at this point in time. But they certainly contributors to the type of economic stimulus package I think we need to see the government developing. And I go back to my opening comments. I think it's the manner in which this report assessed those initiatives that's important here. Looking at demand-driven, looking at mobilising private capital, looking at creating fiscal space for the government rather than calling on limited resources to provide upfront capital for investments, and then balancing those policy objectives of short-term growth and jobs creation with the longer-term aspect of decarbonisation. I think we have to hold to those principles and expand from this base to create a much more comprehensive stimulus package. As Dr. Kathuria was talking about MSMEs, you go into sectors like that, and in addition to doing this one initiative that is outlined in the report, you have to be working across the board on a raft of policy and regulatory improvements to create the ecosystem in which MSMEs can thrive and grow at scale across India. I mentioned before credit enhancement being one of many issues that needs to be addressed.
Right.
But
I
think
I think unfortunately we've run out of time, Dr. Kathuria and Mrs. Stolp. Thank you so much. It's a thanks from me too to TERI for inviting me. On that note, may I hand it back to Dr. Shilpi Kapoor, Senior Fellow at TERI.
Thank you, Mr. Govindraj. And on behalf of TERI, I take this opportunity to propose the vote of thanks to this enlightening set of discussions. I think the topic of the stimulus and leading the recovery process has been very discussed in the right manner today, highlighting the need for this kind of a stimulus to help us in the post-COVID-19 recovery, and also helping the multiple challenges which we face in terms of economic recession, climate challenges, and inequalities. I think the main aspect which I thought was, which I would like to associate with the discussion paper is that the policy proposals which have been made are extremely feasible, and they do focus on the demand side interventions, but have a strong mix of both economic and regulatory measures with them integrated in across sectors. And also they articulate the cost and sources of finance. So I think this is kind of proposals would come very handy in moving forward. One can easily see it from the example of the cleaner transport proposal. I would really like to thank Shri Chaturvedi. His presence has demonstrated the recognition and seriousness that this issue needs to be given. I would extend my thanks to Mr. Simon and Dr. Kathuria for the enlightening discussions and sharing their insights on the topic. And special thanks to Mr. Govindraj for moderating the discussions today and using the short time frame of 1 hour to touch upon the key issues, and which has really helped all those present. And thank you to all the participants who are attending the webinar. Maybe you've not had a chance to speak, but I'm sure you gained a lot from the discussions today. And thank you.
Before we disappear, the report will be online on the TERI website as of now. So I would very much, as has been discussed, I would very much like a discussion on it. Please send us your comments. As has been said, I think the Secretary said it, you may agree or disagree with it, but at least it's a place to start discussions. And what we would like is, as has been said again and again, this is a demand-driven approach. It's an approach which is based on a fiscally neutral basis, looking at the kinds of economic recovery packages there are. It provides us the opportunity to greatly expand the renewables place and the energy efficiency space in the country. We look forward to your comments. Thank you all very much.